so I'll let somebody else speak.
A question though, is this any different than what we saw with Senator Joe McCarthy from Wisconsin in the 1950s?
I think it is somewhat different simply because the megaphones that we have now are so much more huge than they were during the McCarthy era. I was pretty little during the McCarthy era, so that what I've seen, you know, is mostly in documentaries. I think that the problems that we're seeing now and the anxiety producing things that we're seeing now is worse simply because we're just getting bombarded with messages all the time. Whereas in those days, you know, you had the evening news, late night news maybe, and you had the papers of record, and that was pretty much it.
So you're thinking frequency and intensity. So the frequency with which the information is coming at us, and sort of that intensity then rises. Because you're right, I would definitely agree with you. I think that we're all going to sit for this meeting for about an hour and a half or so. It's entirely possible that something will go down during that time and everyone's phone will start to light up, right? With the New York Times alert or the CNN alert or MSNBC or whatever other random channel you might choose. Please.
Yeah, so just to answer my friend's question about what was in the past,
Yeah.
we may have had McCarthyism in the 50s. That doesn't make it right today.
Okay.
That means, in some ways, we should be thinking that we can make progress, that we can get better. But I think what we're feeling now is that that's not what's happening.
Yep.
That, fear is being promoted by our government on a very active basis. So the people the Trump supporters who fear the immigrants, on the converse, the immigrants fear the Trump supporters. In the end, everybody's just afraid.
Sure.
And nobody knows how to get out of that bag.
Sure.
So we're kind of stuck in this gear,
Agreed.
and it won't let us make progress.
Agreed. And I think one of the other things we're seeing is this concept, and again, next concept of this black and whiteness that we see, right? So it's that concept of right and wrong, on and off, black and white. We've lost the gray in our world. And I mean that not only in opinions, but I mean that as it relates to concepts or thoughts. We've lost that, and I think that's changed. For me, at least, I experienced that very differently over the last year or so. It feels very black and white. I don't feel like there's a grayness to the world. And I know, and my fellow social workers in the room, I know that I tell most clients over time, most of your world is gray. There are very, very few concepts that are black and white. If I ask you how your day was, and you say, yeah, it was pretty good, solid 8, right? 8 out of 10. That's pretty good. There's really very few days that are 10, and there's very few days, thank God, that are 1. And so I think that one of the things that's driving that anxiety is that we're polarized. We keep hearing that language, right? So that's a common language that we're hearing. When I hear the word polarized, I think black and white. I think we're watching, example, we're watching MSNBC because it makes us feel better. It makes us feel like we're with folks that are supporting us and concepts that we believe in. And other folks might be watching another channel because they're also wrapping themselves around their own thoughts and their own feelings, and there's no one in the middle, no concept in the middle. So I do think that's a big part of what's happening. Sue.
I think that's a really important point that most of life is gray, and it's something we should remember. I do think there's one thing in this country that is black and white.
Okay, go ahead.
I think that with everything good about America, we were built on the genocide of one group of people, Native Americans, and the slavery, torture, and near genocide of another group, Africans.
Fair.
And that, like I heard Obama say maybe a month ago, that Trump is not the cause, he's a symptom. And I believe that racism is our original sin, and it just keeps coming back, and we recycle it, we call it a lot of other things, and there are other things going on.
Sure.
But unless we, at some point, face that race really defines our relationship in this country, in my opinion, we're going to keep getting stuck in the mud.
So then we spin our wheels. Yeah. others?
I want to just go back to
Please.
fear for a second. It's something, Carol, that when you were talking, I came to think of. Fear for me is real. It's not this, what's in the closet while I'm trying to fall asleep, or the noises I hear outside the window. It's the Supreme Court really doing away with unions and collective bargaining. It's, if you saw the last Michael Moore movie, it's Flint, Michigan being not just contaminated for generations and generations, but a bombing that happened in the town. It's this is Carol, what I was thinking is the real threat that we can lose the right to safe medical care for women and abortions. And we already see
I didn't want to
states.
go there.
Yeah, we already see states. So these are real, these are things that are happening, and
Yeah.
it's not in my imagination. And everything I just mentioned is a hot topic for Quakers right now. And I can't go to my congregation and say, everything's gonna be okay. No, we lived through this, because this is what's happening.
No, that's a very, very fair comment, very fair. Go ahead.
Talking about the truth, and we have now fake news, right?
Walk right into that. Yep,
We have fake news.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I was told by someone that if you repeat something over and over and over, after a while, it always becomes the truth. So then you doubt everything, not just what, people in government say, you just, I get up in the morning and I say to my beloved child, okay, mommy's gonna put on the TV and see, like if the world's still there.
Yeah, got it. Now feel that's real.
But the truth used to be the truth.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose the topic of fake news, because today, for whatever reason, part of my computer system was down, so I had some time on the internet, and I'm like obsessed about Flint. And nowhere in any of the, and I read about 12 papers a day from different parts of the country and different countries. Nowhere except in one very small Michigan newspaper was there an update on the ongoing trial for 3 people in Flint, Michigan on Wolf.
Wow.
Ongoing trial is happening now.
Wow. You're right. Very.
So no news.
No news versus fake news. Go ahead.
I just feel anxious in general for the future in like undoing all of the policy that's being passed now.
Yep.
And I'm just feeling like that's gonna take a really long time. And I'm not excited for that sort of stretch of undoing it.
Sure. No, that's a fair concept and something that when you think about a Supreme Court nomination, for example, it's really about likely your children, right? And so whoever your children are going to be, that's the impact of that. Please.
I just wanted to say something about thinking, because
Yeah, go ahead.
people seem to be losing the nuance, and they're losing this,
Yeah.
that it's all
Yeah.
black and white. And a while ago, I got my master's in online education. And one of the things they said is that the internet, because when you read anything, it's short, people can't read a whole page, that people's minds were actually changing, and that they were losing the ability to concentrate for any length of time on something. That you had to get them in like 5 seconds, and that they wanted quick responses rather than right responses.
Sure.
So that adds to Trump's thing. He can just say, oh, well, I'm making this all right. 5 seconds,
That's right.
he's going to make it right. They don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
So their thought process has actually changed, which is very frightening. How do you bring that thought process back so that they're able to read for a half an hour? I mean, even I, thoughtful person, if I have to read for a half an hour an article about the Russian debacle that's going on, 5 minutes in, I'm like, okay, I got it,
Sure. You're right, technology has changed our world. It has completely changed our world, and we're quick and we're fast. And we're gonna go to the app, right? And we're gonna scroll down and we're gonna see
Right,
headlines.
we're not gonna know what we're doing.
And we may not even read the article, right? We may just look at the headline and keep scrolling, right? So it doesn't even require us anymore to click on the article and just sort of dig into that. You're completely correct. You know, in my house, one of the things that we've taken to, just one example is, we've taken to watching, because of the intensity of everything that's going on and the quick and shallowness of the news, our house at least, we've taken to watching PBS News, right? So Channel 13, at least it's an hour. So we feel like when there's a story that's 7 minutes long, 8 minutes long, there may be a depth to it that provides a little more of an ability. Because I think what the depth allows us to do is to be in the process or in this space long enough to really reflect on, what do I really think about this? I have enough time to hear this story. How do I feel? What do I really think about it, as opposed to 90 seconds on to the next, 90 seconds on to the next. I'm going to make a conclusion and move on to the next. And we've really lost that. I completely agree with you. But we've lost that in this day. Go ahead.
I think that part of the tension that I feel about this and the anxiety that I feel is that I do scroll through the news and I do turn it on at night, you know, when I'm finally sitting down, I put it on. Because I know I'm getting sucked into the whole reality show and it's exhausting. But I keep wishing that I would look at my phone or turn it on and find that there's some conclusion to this. Like, I guess I keep wishing that tonight's the night, something's gonna happen, you know.
Go ahead, yes, that's
I
right.
don't know, I hate to tell
The
you
grand
what's going
conclusion,
through
all
my
right.
head. What might happen.
Understood.
Make me happy, but I think that's part of the tension for me, because I know it's creating anxiety.
Sure.
And that maybe is why I might scroll through and just look at the headlines and
Absolutely.
not really go, oh, well, I'll read a New Yorker article, because I kind of think with that.
Yeah.
But, you know, I scroll through quickly, because it's kind of like, oh, it's the same stuff, oh, you know.
Yeah. And our challenge, because we're in such anxious times, our challenge is that we become aversive to the anxiety, right? So we're scrolling through, and it feels like folks go one way or the other. They either dive deeply into it and become angry, right? Or they're aversive and they pull back, right? And so we can't handle that. So that's why conversations like this are so critical, because this is not fun, right? This is not a particularly pleasant conversation. I'm enjoying it, but it's not a particularly pleasant conversation. But it's the kind of conversations we need to have in order to find a bridge somewhere, somehow. Well, thoughts? Go ahead.
I'm sorry to come in late.
That's okay. Welcome.
I have Parkinson's, so there's a program at the Y that helps me to relieve a lot of things. But anyway, on the question of anxiety and dealing with it, some of you may have seen that Harari has put out a new book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And at the end, he says, well, what I do is meditate. But then before that, he goes through 21 things that are very disconcerting.
Sets you up for that.
So I lost the train of thought. I've worked in the field of counseling and helping people get jobs. One of the big things he says in the book is that a lot of us may not have jobs. You know, and as soon as time as the next decade. And I've been talking to my friends about how do we explore these kinds of things and see how we can help our young people develop skills that help them identify what might be possible futures. For those who at least get through high school and hopefully get some college, there's some hope. The problem is with about 50% of our population that doesn't finish high school, or if they do, it's with minimum skills. And that's a huge issue. And I think we need a variety of things where we restore our country, our land, our parks, you know, FDR's kind of things, and find a way to finance it through the corporations that are succeeding so tremendously. Enough from me.
Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. You're not
Sure.
gonna like it.
I'm sorry?
You're not gonna like it.
I'm not going to like the question. Oh, I love the setup. This is wonderful. Go ahead. Please.
Okay. What's the answer?
Good question, really good question. Appreciate the segue, we're gonna. Right on schedule, by the way, thank you for that previous conversation. So I have two concepts I want us to think about for this evening that could help. And I'm standing up here, to be honest, reflecting on the first concept. I'm gonna go through it quickly because I don't know that this group needs it particularly much, but really two concepts. Self-awareness, i.e. awareness, right? So how we feel about things. I think the last several minutes of this conversation, we don't need a lot of help in that. It feels like this is a group that is pretty aware of how they're feeling. But I have to tell you that your neighbor may not be. And so he or she may have conclusions that come to the table that are radically different than ours. But there's a lack of self-awareness, I think, that's going on. The second concept that is going to be a challenging one, I think, and it's one that frankly we're missing. I feel like it's missing, at least I feel a missing concept around this of late, is the concept of empathy. So I think that we are in a time and place where that entire concept, that entire process has been sort of sucked out of the conversation. It's not in the space. And so with a lack of empathy, we are challenged to sit at your brother-in-law's dining room table and have conversation. You're challenged to invite your neighbor over for coffee. Because if we're having difficulty with putting ourselves in the other's shoe, so to speak, it's really hard for us to get anywhere. Because we're going to stay polarized, and we're going to stay very black and white. Did you have a thought?
Sure.
Please.
I was thinking about the times when we ought to feel the most anxieties.
Yeah.
And for example, 9/11.
Yep.
And the recent floods. And times when people find themselves in the worst possible place.
Yeah.
They come to each other's aid.
Yes.
They come to help each other.
Mm-hmm.
They show their best persons to each other.
Mm-hmm.
That danger and a common disaster helps us put aside all those terrible feelings of anxiety and estrangement.
Sure.
So, but you know, we can't just have a disaster every day so that we're getting along better.
Right.
But how do we get that back?
Where do we go with that? So, great point. Disasters often call us to our best selves, right? They call us to be, to pull ourselves up and to work together. And so what we're going to conceptualize here is developing empathy in the other, right? So going through that process and all kinds of steps that we can do to get there. And then building community and building relationships. So building connection. And let me give you a little bit of a history. I think the greatest example of this in terms of recent history is the LGBTQ community. So here's a community that was very closeted forever, arguably, right? And so over time, what changed in the LGBTQ community, frankly, is that we all came out, right? So there was this process of coming to my brother-in-law's dining room table as a gay person, and as a gay man with my husband, and sitting there knowing, and let me be personal here, knowing that my brother-in-law has a different perspective on this particular world. So it's that middle ground though, right? It's the Jim and I sitting at the dining room table with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law and still having conversation and still having community and learning to tolerate each other's differences. So learning to tolerate that I have my perspective and he has his perspective, and that's in the end really okay. Because things change slowly, quietly sometimes not so quietly. But they change. Your perspective changes a little bit, and what changes it is not just the process of your self-awareness and your ability to be empathetic, but it's your holding your ground, right? It wasn't that I was going to go step back into the closet. That wasn't going to work. So it was stepping forward, being open, being part of that community, but also squarely sitting at my brother-in-law's dining room table and finding connection, finding community. So I think what we can do, empathy and community, have conversation. And this is part of what we've lost. We've lost our ability to sit with folks that we wholeheartedly, fully, and completely disagree with. We're very challenged about that. But we don't have a lot of forums for it. We don't even have a lot of places in the media to do that. Because I'm going to watch MSNBC, but someone else is going to watch Fox, right? And we're going to not, and the two shall not meet, right? And so what we need is the middle somewhere. And I fear that when we talk about the middle, and we talk about that gray, that there's this feeling of dilution, that there's this feeling of, well, I'm willing to do that, but I don't want to sort of dilute my thoughts and feelings, right? I don't want to minimize how I feel or pull back on that, nor does he or she. But that's not, that's a kind of a 10,000 foot level. It's really the two of you together make the whole. And so my challenge, and it's just a suggestion, one guy that works up the street at a mental health center suggested, conversation, community, with people that you fully disagree with. Because it's in that relationship. It's when we have relationship and connection with someone that I fully disagree with, but there's a part of me, I have to tell you, there's a part of me that likes my brother-in-law.
I love my.
All right, fair. Well said. Well said, well said. So in that love, right, in that intersection, in that connection, there's something that will happen in that movement that will bring you a little bit forward and him a little bit forward. That's the challenge. Not easily done for a couple of reasons. Not easily done because relationships are just hard. And not easily done because we've gotten to a point, I think, where we have difficulty, and this is an anxiety provoker, we have difficulty in thinking about things that make us nervous. Because it's hard to sit with that. Maybe we're better at that in religious communities because we come together in a weekly kind of formal process where maybe we're challenged, right? And we're sort of stretched to think about things in a different way. But I guess that's the challenge we all have in front of us, is how do we intersect the two? Empathy and connection, relationship, in community.
Can I ask a question?
Thoughts? Please.
Yeah, just wondering, can you help out with some concrete thoughts that perhaps we could be thinking in that process? So when we're, when we have this person who we see things so differently, and we feel that that person is racist, and how can we form that empathetic mindset? I guess it could be that we have empathy that they are ignorant, or but it's yeah. I'm just wondering.
It's really, really hard. I get it. I really do get it. Go ahead, and then I promise you I'll answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick on that same note.
Yeah.
As a group, we have often bemoaned the fact that, first of all, we're a very like-minded group.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel that.
And the people that we should be talking to are definitely not sitting in this room.
Indeed.
Okay? And I'm just talking about on the local community basis. Okay?
Yes.
Not talking about what goes on in the bigger world.
Okay.
But just here, And there, we're at such odds with each other over political matters, over things as simple as how many miles of road got paved and didn't get paved, and whatever else it may be, And I know I've spoken with Don about this, how we struggle about how do we get together? How do we make that piece happen? It's easy enough for us to sit here and we can say all kinds of great things.
That's right.
But we're like preaching to the choir,
Sure. Yeah, no, I certainly hear your point. I do think that this conversation, though, has tremendous value, because part of the process of being empathetic is having enough self-awareness and enough confidence that you can be in conversation with someone that you fully, wholeheartedly, and completely disagree with. And so I do think that there are some relationships in our lives that are toxic, and so I think that's a process that we all need to sort of think about. And so some relationships just aren't going to work out. But I don't think, I have a very small list of those folks, I think, in terms of, that line is pretty far back. I think that there's value in having conversation with folks that we fully, wholeheartedly disagree. Because I'm gonna flip it and say to you, what's the alternative? So the alternative to that is that we stay in this room and feel okay. This feels good, right? I'm feeling supported. I'm feeling like I'm learning something. I'm being challenged, but I'm feeling like the person next to me is on my side. what's the alternative if we don't push ourselves to have conversation in community with those folks that we completely disagree with? There's gotta be an intersection there, you have to have conversation with them. If you don't, we'll stay in our rooms, they'll stay in their rooms up the street, and we'll sort of have this parallel parade process, right? Parallel, we're gonna go forward, but no intersection. We need to intersect.